We back, and I learned something since we've been gone. I went ahead and cleared the console out. I'm gonna go ahead and highlight and run everything that we ran previously for the IRT section, and I learned that apparently the whole thing I was describing about clicking through things in the console doesn't happen when you highlight lines beyond that of the plot line 110, or 130 rather. So since I highlighted past 130 to 134, even though these are comments, when I run them, I just ran all of them. Bam. I got 4 plots now, so you don't have to click through. So if that seems helpful to you, and you want to just go back and look at the plots instead of looking at them one by one, now you know how to do that too. Cool. So I want to get into these plots in a second. I guess I'll do it now. We got one more line left to do, and that's our item information curve to look at. But we can look at that after we're done looking at these like probability parameter, not parameter, but probability curves. And let's scroll back up to our initial output. So yeah, like I was saying, this is for IJ1, our first item, and we've got 4 difficulty parameters spit out here, and those correspond to these crosses in these curves. Um, and these 3 middling curves, let me explain what each curve is. Each curve is represents the numeric response given by a person taking that response to the item. And since this is a Likert 1 to 5 response, we have a line for each response option 1 to 5. And these middling options, 2, 3, and 4, are similar. They look similar in normal curves, which is not what we expect out of an IRT, like a dichotomous IRT model. We'd expect something more like the 5 option. But that's because we're working with these Likert responses. Um, so yeah, each difficulty parameter that we're given is the intersection between these curves. So basically what it's saying is, um, let's just pretend for a second that only this 5 green curve was here for a second. Normally our difficulty would be set right about at the middle of this curve, because um, that's basically the distinction of when it flips over. Um, but since we have multiple response options here, it's not dichotomous. The difficulty parameter is basically telling us when the probability of one response, of the top response, shifts over to a different response option. So that's represented by these crosses between um, the graphs, the lines, curves. That's the word I'm looking for, the curves. Um, but only at the topmost probability. So this first difficulty parameter is found at negative 2.065. That's right here. So it's when the probability of someone responding with a 1 being the highest changes over to the probability of 2 being the response in terms of theta space, ability space. So people that are at a theta dimension that's less than negative 2.06 are most likely to respond at a 1, because their probability is the highest there until you hit that spot. So higher than that spot, they start to respond to, or the probability is more likely that they will respond to than 1, and so on. So the next spot we're going to find is at our second thing here, negative 0.97, which we see right here, where the 2 and 3 intersect. and that's when they become more likely to respond with 2. You see this, or with 3. The 3 window is actually pretty small. It's only a difference of or less than 0.6, about 0.559, because that's the difference between these two. And then people start to respond with 4. And then finally the last one, or they're more likely to respond. It's all about probability. I'm not sure if that was clear, but it's all about the theta space. So when someone is at 0 theta space, like the middling theta space, they're most likely to respond with a 4 for this item 1, 80% probability. Whereas as we go high in theta space, there are 4s, which are incredibly high in theta space, 100%, almost 100%, approaching 100%, well, approaching 100% as we go, but practically 100% likelihood of answering with a 5. And then same over here on this dimension with the 1. That's exactly how we would see out of a dichotomous RT model, but here we can look at, like I just did with 0, where it's about 80% would respond with 4. Anyway, I guess I can talk about the discrimination factor too. That has to do with the slopes of the lines. They all have the same discrimination factor because of the nature of probability. Curve. As this curve goes down in probability, the curves have to go up in probability because probability always has to be at 100%. So as this curve goes down, we see this curve go up until eventually this one takes over, and we see that we have a little bit of 3 probability, but not much at all. This discrimination value is pretty high at 2.7, so we see pretty steep curves and pretty confident spaces. Like this area is unique. Well, I guess that's not really a good way to put it, but basically at this point, if we cut off at this point and looked at just this area, large portion of that area is described, we expect to see it putting in a 1, whereas a smaller portion for 2 and practically no amount of anything else. Yeah. A good one to look at for discrimination is, just for comparison's sake, is IJ2, where things are a lot flatter. The slopes are less steep. So you can see kind of comparing the same kind of thing. It's not exactly the same, of course, because the difficulty parameter is a little bit different, but actually not that much different. So we can compare them here for IJ2. You can see how much more of this area, this probability is accounted for by people who are responding 2s, and even so 3s when you're looking at the -2 theta space. So I'm just going to flip back. Yeah. See how steeper that is compared to all this area that previously wasn't in there. Anyway, that's kind of it. You can see that these are all kind of patterned similarly. The difficulties are off a little bit. I think the biggest thing you can notice between items is that IJ2 has a much smaller discrimination value. Oh wow, I'm almost at 10 minutes already. I've just been rambling. And IJ4 has some different difficulty values, mostly because it's more centered around 4. You see the 4 curve is here at 0, so there's less discrimination going on. Not discrimination in terms of this number, but there's a lot of possibilities, like for a theta space of like, what's this, like 1.5. You can see that there's not much discrimination happening there, so that's interesting. Basically the windows in difficulty are a lot smaller on the negative theta space side for item 4. Anyway, let's look at our final plot, which is the item characteristic, or item information curve, sorry. Boom. So this is kind of like a agglomeration of everything. Kind of, not really, but we're looking at the amount of information that each item gives us at each point in theta space. We can see our ij2 does not give us much information across the board. It's a little bit more helpful at higher levels of theta than other items, but not really that much, honestly. But that's a reflection of the markedly lower difficulty, the markedly lower discrimination value that we found here. So it doesn't give us much more information than any other item for the majority of theta space, although it is more helpful at the higher levels of theta space than others. What I thought particularly interesting about this curve is the existence, or not, I mean, the comparison between item 1 and item 3, how item 1 kind of has this tendency to give a little bit more information at slightly lower levels of theta space when you're looking relatively. So like it gives it, okay, look, I'm waking up soon. Peaks, and then so like you have a peak in item 1, and then a peak in item 3, and then a peak in item 1, and a peak in item 3. So they kind of work together somewhat well. That's just kind of neat to see. But the interesting and easily interpretable thing I thought was coming out of this was comparing ij3. Oh god. Okay, I'm clipping this right here, as you can definitely tell. The thing I just said was kind of wrong because I kept saying ij1 instead of ij4. That was because I had flux running and I couldn't actually tell which one was different, so sorry about that. I have changed that. So now I think the blue and the black lines are more distinguishable. Again, what I was saying before, I was actually talking about ij4 compared to ij3, which I think was apparent because I was making like motions and stuff. So hopefully that's not too confusing. But the more interesting one that I wanted to get to was the comparison of ij3 and ij1, which is that if you look at these difficulty values, ij1 and ij3, no, yeah, all right. Yeah, ij1 and ij3, minimal differences across the board, less than 0.1 here, or just slightly above 0.1 here, less than 0.1 here, less than 0.1 here, less than 0.05 there, less than 0.01 there. So we have troughs that exist basically at the same time, but we see that ij3 has a higher discrimination than ij1, and that's shown here by the amount of information that's given, because even though they follow the same pattern, basically, ij3's better discrimination value is clearly shown here because there's more information available pretty consistently throughout, except for when they start to level off. At that point, they're both the same. I guess you get a little bit more information here with ij1, and it's kind of expected with the lower discrimination values, as we kind of see with this low discrimination value ij2 that I think kind of level off at the ends of theta space. But I thought that was really cool. The difficulties were really similar, and the discriminations were not, and you could see that really clearly. I'm running out of time, but I'm done, so thanks for your time.